So while people file in, I'll just say I'd like to welcome you to
Mhm.
tonight's presentation. This is the September 26th meeting of the British Empire Study Group. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your support. We know it's a very busy weekend. And for those of you who are in line for the storm, please stay safe. I hope it doesn't hit you all that hard. I would like to just acknowledge the passing of a really great icon in philately, Frank Mandel. For those of you who are not familiar with Frank, he was an auction agent for ages, and he was just a very knowledgeable person, and he was an attorney. He started his life as an attorney, but really great guy. He will be missed. Rob, if you could, I'll turn it over to you so you could do the introduction to Steve. And I'd like to thank Steve and Landon, his grandson, for lending a hand and getting Steve on stage here. So thank you very much. Rob?
Thanks, Joan. Welcome, everyone, to our program this evening. Dr. Stephen J. Berlin will present The Devil's Mail, Part 2, More Letters That Survived Horrors. There's no end to the atrocities that mail has survived. This should be a very entertaining and appropriate topic to get everyone in the mood for a philatelic Halloween. Dr. Berlin has assembled an extensive collection of mail and postal history items that have literally survived some of the world's most hellish events, from floods, blizzards, famine, and other natural disasters to tragic accidents on the earth, in the air, and on the water, as well as mail that has survived acts of true evil. Dr. Berlin's presentation shows only a fraction of his collection of rare and unique items. Due to its size, the program was split into two parts. Many of you will remember part 1 from last year. If you missed it, you can watch it anytime on our YouTube channel. Part 2, this evening, will show even more dastardly mail interruptions and stands on its own without the need to view part 1. Dr. Stephen J. Berlin is a graduate of the Ohio College of Podiatric Medicine and became the chief of podiatry service at Fort Jackson Army Hospital. He started Podiatric Pathology Laboratories, which was sold to Quest Laboratories. Steve's a member of several philatelic groups and is an active writer and exhibitor. So without further ado, I give you our esteemed presenter for this evening, Dr. Stephen Berlin.
Rob, thank you for the introduction. That's very kind of you. And I want to thank certainly the British Empire Study Group for asking me back after the first presentation. It's great to be with you. I'm sorry that the weather is so bad in certain parts of the country right now, where a number of people might not be able to listen to my presentation, but as Joan Harmer mentions, they will be able to watch it on email or other forms of ability to screen or see the presentation. But I think I should like to just basically state what we're looking about. What is the devil's mail? I think that's the important thing. And I want to go back to it for a second. I missed it. I don't know how I did that, but I will try. Okay. Well, the devil's mail is many factors, but the majority of the factor is death and destruction of what's actually taken place within the postal system around the world. It's covers that have been damaged, destroyed due to war, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, weather disturbances, political disruptions, unusual events, mail robbery, and terrorism, and all the different evaluations and divisions of everything that I just mentioned. But the big thing is the threat to the postal services around the world, and due to all these particular events and disasters that may occur. Joe, I'm not forwarding it. Let me just see. What did I do?
Click inside the presentation, Steve, and then,
Yeah, for some reason, I'm not being able to forward it now. What should I do, Jim?
okay, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little arrow. Over, other way.
This way?
Yep, click that.
Okay, so I should use that arrow to forward the slides.
That will work too. There's many ways, but
Okay, I just need to move you and Landon a little bit. So maybe move it down a little bit. That's good. Well, it's interesting that we should start off a story where ghosts are actually involved. And you mentioned Halloween. This certainly would be an interesting slide to talk about. But this is an early slide, and it was in 1671 in England, where a ship captain by the name of John Pyle was traveling on his Wherry boat, which is a flat-bottom barge, and he was sailing around London, and he had a few guests on his ship, and all of a sudden he had a dream while he was driving the ship, basically, that he saw ghosts, and as soon as he finished seeing the ghosts, the ship that he was traveling with or steering actually got in some big trouble and wrecked. Fortunately, several hours later, the people were saved on his boat. But it's an interesting start for the Devil's Mail. I guess I go back to the same arrow, Joan. Well, we go from ghosts to the devil, and this is a devil's town. Volcano, West Virginia, 1869 to 1879. A 10-year-old town developed because oil developed shortly after the Civil War. And it was only 100 feet deep that they had to drill. And it came in like a volcano. So that's how the town established its name, Volcano, West Virginia. But interestingly enough, there was about 8,000 to 10,000 people in the town at the time. But in 79, about 10 years later, a fire developed within the town, and consequently burned the whole town. And interesting that the fire had to start in the saloon. That way, I guess no one could drink and watch the fire happen at the same time. But in either case, that's basically the cover of the slide. And here you can see the nice markings on the skull, and all in blue. So the devil's skull is shown, particularly on this particular cover. This is due to a earthquake, severe earthquake that happened in Mount Pelée in Martinique. Not Martinique, but in Pelée was the volcano eruption. Some reason I'm hitting my slides wrong, Joan. I don't know what to do.
try hitting your backspace for going back and your space bar. See if that works.
Okay, I think I'm just trying to move my no, I'm sorry. Well, we'll do the best we can. This here you can see that the volcano actually was a significant eruption on the island and completely destroyed everything in its path. 29,000 people were killed in this earthquake, and consequently there was only 2 survivors. One was in a jail at the time, where the lava from the volcano surrounded the jail. He survived. 15 ships in the harbor were destroyed at the time, but this particular postcard that I'm showing you was actually a ship that was coming from Denmark, and it just happened to be sailing to the Caribbean, where it helped rescue some of the people that were unfortunately was trying to escape the damage that was taking place on this island. Anyway, We talk about shipwrecks. The Titanic, keep hitting that same thing. The Titanic on April 10th finally left Southampton, with stops in Cherbourg and Queenstown, and then on to the United States. Unfortunately, the ship's captain, Captain Edward Smith, was in such a rush that he wanted to try to beat a speed record with this particular situation. And unfortunately, he was warned about all kinds of icebergs in the ocean, and he should be cautious. Unfortunately, he wasn't cautious enough. And the Titanic hit the iceberg and sunk within a very short period of time. Out of the passengers, significant death occurred because they couldn't get everybody in the lifeboats in time to save them all. So out of the 2,220 passengers, 1,513 perished in this disaster. Unfortunately, O.S. Woody, the postmaster, was trying to save the mail at the time. That's why these two facing slips, not covers, but actual facing slips that were being used to place on the ship's cargo of mail, which was 3,000 bags of mail on the Titanic. About 12 of these, the 15 of these Titanic or these facing slips survived. They were actually in Woody's breast pocket, wrapped in a plastic bag. And when he was fished out of the water, he was unfortunately dead. He was frozen and dead. And these facing slips survived. So these give you an idea where they were going. One was to Boston. There was others to New York and so forth and so on. But they're extremely rare facing slips. There was nothing else really recovered from the Titanic until just the last few years ago, as you all know. But they are very significant items. One of the most interesting items I discovered was just about a year or so ago at in Germany at the big stamp show in Essen. And in World War II, the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And believe it or not, this one cover that I'm showing you was actually recovered after the debris was removed around the church and the whole area, even though it was still radioactive. I did not know about this cover at all until this past year. It's in a museum in Germany currently. But over 2,000 people died with the effects of the atomic bomb that was dropped at the time on Hiroshima. And it was called the Little Boy. The Little Boy did a lot of damage, but it did make a very significant postal piece of history, this one particular cover that I'm displaying at this time. Well, war is definitely a very big area for producing unusual events and serious events with death and destruction. This happens to be, I keep hitting the keyboard here. I apologize for that. This happens to be 1642, and it was from England. And consequently, these were letters that were going to Spain. And a lot of fighting was going on even with pirates at this period of time in the 1600s between Spain, England, France, and other parts of the world. And this is just a cover just demonstrating, we're talking about what was happening in this particular area at the time. Another cover also, I keep getting mixed up on the top here. Actually, my headlines are a little mixed up here, Joan, so I can't, I apologize for this today. Let me go back here. Anyway, this was a cover on a ship from Veracruz to Philadelphia, and it was carried through Mexico. This cover called from the Pastry War. I don't know if anybody's really familiar with the Pastry War, but it was very interesting. It was somewhat political, and not too friendly. But basically, what happened, the event came about when a French pastry cook in Mexico was not paid for his cooking or his baking, and he was robbed by various looters, and he actually demanded compensation for it, and Mexico refused it. When Mexico refused it, apparently the King of France got very upset, and he ordered a blockade of all of Mexico. And this is basically what happened. And until they agreed to take whatever had to be done, the diplomatic intervention was done by Great Britain, and French forces basically withdrew from Mexico. But it was an interesting thing where they actually blockaded the Mexican country. Very unusual event at this particular time. So another couple of covers. I apologize again. These are some covers basically showing various sieges that took place. The first one was Ladysmith, which was in the Boer War. And it lasted for several months, where the Boers at the time were stronger than the British that were present. And consequently, they held a siege in this particular post office area, and they were recovering all kinds of postage that was coming in by the trains and things of that nature. They were actually stealing uniforms, medications, anything that took place at this particular time during this siege. I don't know why I'm having this trouble. I'm sorry, Joan, but I did something wrong. Anyway, Ladysmith had many markings, and they even misspelled and spelled the siege wrong. And this is just a couple examples of that particular situation that took place. These are other situations during the Boer War, and I think this is what's so interesting about this particular cover. This particular cover was a postcard actually from Ireland to Cape Town, South Africa, and it was on the armored train that was wrecked by the Boers near Cheverly on November 1899. The stamps were canceled with a field post office stamp. But the interesting thing is that Winston Churchill was a journalist at this time, and he was on this train, and he was taken as a prisoner. And fortunately for him, he was able to escape a couple months later. And that's what's so interesting about this particular cover that I'm showing at this time. Another Mexican Civil War issue, another siege, you might say. In this particular cover, you can see the 4-line blue marking, which basically stated return to the interruptions of communications which could not be delivered. So it's a Mexican seal was also applied in the upper part of this cover, but the economics and the political factions for power started around 1910 at this period of time in Mexico and lasted till 1920. Very interesting cover. This is World War I. Every war had death and destruction, and they all had very interesting situations. And all I'm trying to show is examples of these specific wars, because you can spend all day just talking about one of these wars. But in this particular case, this was This was actually a, get back here again. This was German submarines actually attacking shipping. And they attacked one of the major ships called the SS Arthur, which was a Swedish ship, but also a battleship. And consequently, they actually stole all the mail and everything else, but destroyed the battleship. And consequently, this is the label that was placed on this particular cover. We talk about wars, we also have to think about espionage. This is a very unusual espionage cover, and you can see the markings on this particular cover. There's several of them, and basically the mail to this addressee, deliverable under Espionage Act, was not delivered. This is an interesting thing that took place in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it was due to a newspaper. And the newspaper apparently was very socialistic and not too friendly to America. Elizabeth Thomas was apparently a very wealthy Milwaukee resident who was the owner of the newspaper at the time. And Victor L. Berger, who's best also a socialist, and he was the editor of the newspaper. But it wound up to, he was actually the spy, a European spy. So I thought this would be a very interesting addition. This here, the registration number is actually from the government identifying this particular piece of mail. In either case, Berger was sentenced to 20 years in jail, in prison. So espionage is a whole nother area where death and destruction may have taken place. But this is a very interesting cover and very scarce. Again, another cover in World War II this time, again, showing from Canada, Scotland, who was on the ship Eros that on the 17th of June was torpedoed by German submarines off the northwest coast of Ireland. The Eros was beached and the mail was in the ship's hold, which was washed ashore and salvaged. Many auxiliary markings are known on this particular ship disaster, and there were also many casualties as well. So again, these are just specific incidences of various wars that we're talking about. Again, this is World War II, where you can see here where the mail was held in France during the German occupation. And it's also auxiliary markings that showed Japanese in Hong Kong, also with similar markings as well, which are quite scarce. And the occupation there, after the occupation of the war, most of this mail was released. But we all know how much damage and death that took place during this period of time. Very significant in that period of war. This is another cover in World War II, where German raider ships known as the Orion and Comet attacked British shipping. This happened to be from Australia that was on its way to Ocean Island. And again, these ships actually destroyed some of the other shipping that was taking place in various parts of the world. And here's the marking called the Raider mail. There's also, and these are very scarce items, there's only about 10 of these known. And a lot of the content and other things that were recovered are known to have auxiliary markings, such as sunk by raiders. And this is one of the 10 covers that I mentioned, with sensor markings and from Australia. This very interesting covers, and again, specific incidences during the wars, and these are all specific covers. And this is just a fraction of some of the interesting covers in World War II. Here's another one from a colorful one, very colorful cover from Argentina to Holland. And it was delayed due to bombings due to Pearl Harbor. And, that took place on 7 December 41. Anyway, this cover was returned to sender as it couldn't be forwarded because of the war and the way the mail was being carried at that particular time. This is also a very interesting cover. We talked a little about espionage. Again, this was in World War II, and it's a very interesting airmail cover from San Pedro to Bucaramanga, Colombia. And it was delayed in transit on August 12, 1945. A black line censor marking to the left of the cover, you can see where it says Esta Correspondencia, so forth and so on, the censor. It was applied stating that the mail had been delayed from the Office of Censor from Honduras to Colombia. AX First, who sent the mail, was believed to be a German espionage agent and was also hunted by the Jewish people for his involvement in the war and war crimes. The back stamp is reduced 75%, as you can see, but the censor strip, unfortunately, was lost on the left side of the envelope. But it's a very rare cover and very interesting postal history as well. This is kind of a cute cover. It's not a Pony Express cover, but it kind of looks like it. It's actually from World War II, and it was a prize court cover. In other words, some of these ships and things from war were captured, and they all wound up in the Bahamas, or Bermuda rather, until the war was over, and then they were sold at auction. And you can see the specific number here for the auction area what was applied, and then you can see the colorful stamps and the back stamps, et cetera, on the label. It's a very, very pretty cover, and this happened in a lot of wars, certainly in World War I, World War II, and God knows where else around the world. But this is just a very interesting cover from World War II. Earthquakes, definitely major problems. Here you can see an earthquake, one of the earlier earthquakes in 1868. The interesting thing was, this was in Peru. And at the time, this was the largest earthquake in the world. And it was like 8 on the Richter scale at the time. But the Kearsarge, or the USS Kearsarge, was on its way to help people evacuate. And there were several tsunamis that took place. Every ship that was in port at the time, which is in the Arica port of Peru, which is currently now Chile, were all destroyed. Thousands of people also lost their lives. And it's an interesting ship that came to help evacuate as many people as possible, but also to help protect looting and things of that nature that may have occurred on the particular country at the time. Just if this is a letter that was actually written on the ship, the post office was not available at the time to even get a stamp. It was actually completely destroyed on the port. So there was no postage stamp on this particular cover. But again, an interesting example of what took place in the earthquakes. We're all familiar, or I'm sure most of us are familiar with the earthquake in San Francisco in 1906. It was also a pretty disastrous scenario. 3,000 people were killed. But I think what's important here is to know that there was no mail or no postage stamps at the time. So just about every one of the covers that left San Francisco wind up having a 2-cent postage due stamp applied. But it's nice when you could find one that didn't have the stamp applied. And this was fairly scarce, but apparently New York City must have felt very, very uncomfortable and sad as to what was happening in San Francisco at the time, that they decided not to even put a 2-cent stamp, postage stamp on the cover. So I thought this was kind of an interesting cover. And you can see from the postcards that I'm showing a week after the disaster of all the damage that took place in San Francisco at the time. On the last presentation I made, we had covers coming into San Francisco at that time, which were also very scarce and also interesting markings as well. I'm getting used to what's happened here, Joan. So we'll be fine. Another earthquake, the Quetequake, very common earthquake covers, not Quetequake. We got a little tongue-tied there. Anyway, 60,000 people died from this particular earthquake in 1935. It's interesting to know that the largest earthquake in the United States was in 1964 in Alaska. And that was 9.2 on the Richter scale. So you can imagine how bad it was. Fortunately, there weren't too many deaths. You know, Alaska is a pretty scarce population, so that's probably why, but it was a huge amount of damage. But in either case, talking about this specific cover, a lot of deaths took place. And what's interesting, there are so many different auxiliary markings from this particular disaster that it can make a nice collection in itself. And I do have several different markings, but this is just two of them. And they're both coming from London to, I guess, to the earthquake country in India. And this is basically what they are. Very, very interesting covers. And certainly, you know, there it goes. I can't find it. Well, what other damage occurs? Volcanic eruptions. So you have earthquakes, you have floods, you have tornadoes. This is just volcanic eruptions, which can really be pretty nasty. I showed you the one on Mount Pelée. These are two covers that I recently acquired, and you can see the damage. I thought they were almost like mates, the way the covers are kind of shaped. But these are two covers from that disaster that have been salvaged. These are pretty scarce covers. And in either case, as I mentioned, there are only two people that survived that were on the island. One was in the jail, and the other 20-some thousand people that were killed, unfortunately, during this disaster. But there were a lot of ships there, as I mentioned from the prior cover. And it's just an interesting disaster. All disasters are interesting. Unfortunately, they're not very pleasant and not very happy after the situation. Other weather disturbances, lightning affecting shipping. Imagine even today, you could be on a little sailboat, and you get hit by lightning. Well, this is what happened in 1840 on the Britannia. As it departed from Liverpool carrying produce, it was heavily hit in storms, had major damage, struck by lightning, and consequently splintered the sail, the masts, and everything. But fortunately, it didn't completely sink, and the passengers were helped at sea, and consequently they were saved. But the damage to the ship was significant. Well, we talk about lightning, talk about hurricanes. Again, all these disasters happen in war and in weather are the two major factors. War probably much worse than weather, but in either case, none of them are pleasant. And this particular cover, again, was sent from Kirkwall, the Orkney Islands to Rochester, New York. And it finally got there. but it had some major damage due to the hurricanes and had to pull in for repairs before it was finished before it actually landed in New York and Boston. But again, there's all kinds of scarce incidences that take place. This happened to be Brian Wood's cover in the past. He was a big ship cover collector. Here you can see ice, another form of weather. This time the ship got frozen in the ice in Boston Harbor. It was coming from it was the RMS America that left Liverpool and arrived in Boston on January 21st. And it got stuck in the ice for about 8 days. So it couldn't move out for about 8 days till January 29th. So different rates were applied in this particular case, almost like a penalty charge of 48 cents for the cover to be transported. Let me get back here now. All right. Just trying to get my bearings. This was another cover, again, due to a snowstorm. And here you can see this particular case, some really nice markings, delayed by snowstorm, and this one delayed a snow blockade of 7 days. Two very interesting covers, great markings on them. No death is known to happen in this particular situation, but certainly snow, ice, and various forms of weather can cause various forms of injuries to people and various forms of accidents that take place. But I like to show some of these covers because they are pretty scarce and they are interesting to see. Fog, another aspect. Fog, you don't want to be flying in a heavy airplane, any kind of airplane sometimes, because you can't really see. But in this particular case, this was an express, mail coach express that in 1906 that was traveling from London to Hamburg to Cologne, and it crashed. The train crashed in Irisburg. Thick fog. This train hit another train and consequently was a major disaster. And these are the markings, the German markings that may have been applied at the time or after the mail was recovered. Another storm. Here you can see this was also a postcard that was sent from London to Holland, and it was delayed by water. So it had severe storms, raging storms, flooding, so forth that took place. And what happened here is that the train actually hit a barrier and broke in half. This was actually the ship hit a barrier and broke in half. And consequently, there was a lot of deaths in this particular incident. Out of 180 passengers and crew, there were only 15 survivors after the wreck. So not a very pleasant situation in this particular case. Here are bridge collapses, and it collapses with a train on top of it. Again, due to storms. And this particularly was flooding that took place for several days prior. And the interesting thing is that this bridge in Casper, Wyoming, was evaluated just an hour or two before the train rode over the bridge. And unfortunately, it did collapse. Consequently, a lot of the people were able to escape, but 31 people were killed in this train disaster. And this was basically known as the Coal Creek disaster in Casper, Wyoming at the time. Again, a very interesting cover. Not too many covers are known to exist, but a sad disaster itself. Sandstorms. We've talked about ice, rain, snow. fog. How about sandstorms? Sandstorms do occur. They even occur, believe it or not, in Africa, and even when I have a place. Sometimes I'm in the Virgin Islands, and you get the sandstorm that actually comes through around March, and also often comes from Africa. But in either case, this is a particular airmail cover that was sent from London to India, and the flight was delayed due to the sandstorm in Iraq. So again, these are some extensive issues that create damage, destruction, and certainly death. There were no markings, no auxiliary markings on this particular cover, but it's a scarce airmail interrupted cover, as mentioned. Trying to find my arrow here again. I don't think we found it. Again, another flood cover. Cover from Dallas to Chicago was traveling on the Mississippi, Kansas, Texas passenger train when it hit a disaster. The rains, tornadoes, and extensive flooding on Oklahoma and north of Texas caused the disaster as this train plunged into Elk Creek near Muskogee, Oklahoma on the 14th of April, 1945. Fortunately, the passengers and crew were able to escape before toppling into the swollen river below. Several caches, particularly on this particular disaster, are known. This one basically states that condition and delay due to train wreck and flood is what the auxiliary marking shows in this particular incident. Still having some trouble again. Okay, here it is, John. Well, it's nice that the U.S. military can help in these disasters. This is two examples of when hurricanes hit in the Caribbean, which was Hurricane Emily. And that was in 87. And in 88, the other hurricane that took place was Hurricane Florence. And that was in the US and covered a large part of the United States. Fortunately, there was not a lot of death and destruction, but it was reported in different areas. But I thought these were two interesting military, you might say military covers, where they're not really military covers, but someone made them up. And I thought they were interesting, talking about the various missions that the military did in helping people in disasters from around the world. And this happens to be two U.S. military covers helping from the hurricanes that caused major damage. Typhoons. This is Typhoon Elsie. Interestingly enough, this was the wrong marker that was placed on this particular cover. This was Typhoon Omar, which struck Guam on August 23rd, 1992. It caused major damage, $457 million in damage, destroying 2,158 homes. And unfortunately, somehow, someone used the wrong postal marking and put delayed by Typhoon Elsie. But actually, it was Typhoon Omar that really struck the island at this period of time. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Political disruption. This is a very interesting cover. We've all heard of the action with the suffragettes in England. And this was in 1913, and it was in London. It was a local cover sent from Cardiff, which was damaged in a pillar box, which is a mailbox, on a Wednesday evening. The cover was sent to a Mr. Pennington of Victoria Avenue and was kind to allow the Daily News on Saturday, May 24th, 1913, to reproduce the damage that occurred to this cover. Fortunately, this was the only cover damaged by the attack of suffragettes at this time in Cardiff that evening. Suffragettes caused considerable damage to mails as part of their campaign to secure, interestingly enough, votes for women. you know how women can be. They can be pretty tough when they get mad at you. And you can see what they're doing to this cover. In either case, many postal boxes were lit on fire. With ink may have been poured into the post boxes and so forth. And there was also a lot of other violent situations that took place in this period of time. And I think it was 1920 that they finally got the voting privileges, if I'm not mistaken. But it was really an interesting cover. Unusual events. This was a very interesting event. This was a cover dated 1641, where there was a dog fight to take place. And this talks all about the crave of favor of company, of having people attend a dog fight. So I thought this was an interesting cover just to show. Another interesting cover on 1846, where this was in the States, where there was bounties for crows and fox scalps, interestingly enough. And in 19th century, to typically claim the bounty, one took an oath before justice of the peace that the crows and foxes were killed within the past 12 months. Otherwise, apparently they would have been fined. Anyway, there's an interesting letter talking about the killing of foxes and animals. This is another cover. Again, whoops, hitting the wrong buttons, I apologize. This was another situation where money was actually in an envelope. And at the time, money in the 1855s and in England and in other places of the world was not allowed. I even have a cover where gold was placed into the cover. And then after a while, they started allowing mail being posted with currencies and things of that nature. But in London, it had to be marked on the front of the cover, which I thought was interesting. Again, just very unusual shipping items from different parts of the world. And here you can see another interesting item where the attack were by termites. I have a collection of what's eating your mail, and I thought these were two very, very nice Confederate covers that were badly destroyed by termites. And I thought it would be something to show. So I have a little exhibit, what's called What's Eating Your Mail. And these are two of my covers that I thought would be interesting to show. Here you can see a handwritten situation where the mailman was actually fell into a drain or in a hole at the time. And this is what that cover was showing. Very unusual incidences of mail. Mail robbery, another area that I have a couple covers to show. But this picture is basically showing the theft of the Royal Mail carriage in the 1800s. And it's just a nice picture that I have. This is the oldest known mail robbery cover in existence to my knowledge. It's dated 1745, and it was due to the Jacobite Rebellion. And interestingly enough, this happens to be my cover, and it was addressed to Alexander Hamilton. God, you know, when I first saw it, Alexander Hamilton was a famous statesperson in the United States in this period of time. But after I researched it, he was born like 30 years after this cover came out. So I was a little disappointed, but the cover is remarkable. You can see here is opened by the rebels, and we actually brought it further down here so you can actually see it. There are three of these covers known. This is 1745, which, as I mentioned, is the oldest known mail robbery cover in existence, to my knowledge. There are three known. One is in the Bath Museum in London, or outside of London, and one is also held in a European collector's collection also. These three covers that I'm talking about are all dated 1 week apart. I'm not sure, but Alexander Hamilton was, I don't know if he was an attorney at the time, but apparently he had a lot of family mail, and that's pretty much what this letter was all about. What happened was that during the Jacobite War, the Jacobites actually surrounded one of the post offices, and they actually looked at every piece of mail that came in and that left. And that's why you can see it was opened by the rebels. And that's the basic story of this particular situation. Very interesting cover and very interesting period of time. This is another mail robbery covered. It's a little more modern, 1923, when the de Dutramont brothers attempted to rob the train. It was train number 13 in Siskiyou, Oregon. And when they stopped the train, they went over to the mail car, and the postmaster in the car would not open the doors. So they figured, let's see if he's not going to open the doors, we're going to open it for him. And they blasted it open with dynamite. Unfortunately, they used so much dynamite, they destroyed everything in the car. Not only that, but unfortunately, they killed the mail clerk as well. The three brothers, Roy, Ray, and Hugh, were finally caught and captured several years after this disaster took place, this mail robbery disaster took place. But it's a very interesting cover. It was actually advertising gold and silver in the San Francisco area. And at the bottom here, you can see the actual postal label that was attached, or attached describing the incidents that took place. Two very, very interesting mail robbery covers. Terrorism. Terrorism is horrible today. It's happening all over the world. This happens to be just a nice photograph that I have of a bomb going off within the Postal Service, affecting several postal employees. Well, terrorism, as I mentioned, is a terrible thing. It's happening, as you know, everywhere. This was in 1955, an El Al flight, an Israeli flight from Netherlands going to London and then on to Istanbul. Anyway, the plane actually veered off course and was shot down by the Bulgarian Air Force. All occupants were killed. The pilot of this plane at the time was a very knowledgeable pilot who flew for the Israeli Air Force. But apparently he flew off course, and the Bulgarians didn't have a nice thing to think about Israeli pilots or Israel in general, and consequently shot down the plane. And that's really a pretty sad disaster that took place. Here you can see another disaster. This took place on a cover that was let's see. This was a cover that was out of Cyprus, and apparently there was a bomb placed on this cover on this plane, and it went off and killed, unfortunately, the crew and 59 passengers. No one has ever been caught from this disaster. No one has ever pleaded guilty to this disaster, but it's still unknown what's happened. But these are rare situations, rare covers that were recovered from this particular incident. 1969, another disaster. This one happened on ground, where an Ethiopian airliner parted from Athens, Greece, to Frankfurt, Germany, and it landed in Frankfurt and was being cleaned. The plane was being cleaned, and unfortunately, there was a couple bombs that were placed on the plane while it was being cleaned, and they exploded, injuring and killing some of the cleaning staff. And apparently the Eritrean Liberation Front claimed responsibility, saying that the bombings are a retribution for the transportation of Ethiopian troops in Eritrea aboard Ethiopian aircraft. Unfortunately, it was a terrible disaster, and the politics that apparently between the Germans and the Eritrean Liberation Army didn't sit too well, and consequently, this is the postal card that was survived from that particular blast. There's a couple of these postcards known. Another one, Swiss Air Flight 1970, from Zurich to Tel Aviv, a bomb was hidden in the postal bag and exploded. The pilot naturally tried to return to Zurich, but unfortunately did not make it. All 38 passengers and 7 crew were killed in this particular crash. And you can see here is the four line black cachet and describing the situation, with Coronado being the bomb that took place. In 1973, another significant disaster occurred. And this was trying to get the headline down there so you can see it. Anyway, it was this was a Japanese airliner that was en route to Tokyo, where it was skyjacked by Palestinian commandos. And they finally landed in Benghazi. Passengers were liberated, but the plane was blown up. And this was a Dutch cover that was signed, and you can see the letter that was written by the official Dutch post office describing the incident at this particular time. Fortunately, I think there was one person killed in this particular incident, but again, terrible time in the 70s. There were several different terrorist attacks in the air. This is another one 10 days later, where a Dutch cover was sent to Japan, and it was carried on the Japanese airline Flight 404. It was hijacked again by members of the Japanese Red Army, with 4 Palestinian terrorists also on board. And apparently a grenade went off in the plane by the skyjackers. And they landed the plane, after flying around for 89 hours. But anyway, again, another disaster and deaths that occur in this particular incident. And this is one of the only known covers from this particular terrorist disaster. So again, some very, very horrible situations that we're seeing. Again, this is a letter in the African postal system, and it actually exploded within the system. And it was a local letter that was from Pretoria, South Africa, and the terrorist bomb went off in a mail bag while it was in transit. No known people were injured, but very few covers are known from this particular incident. Here's the official letter from the post office, the African post office, basically stating what actually may have taken place. Again, we've all heard of the Unabomber. Well, this is a Unabomber cover. And on November 1979, a badly burned cover from a Chicago to Washington, D.C. flight took place, which was Flight 444. A bomb went off in the baggage area where mail was being carried. Fortunately, the bomb did not explode completely and caused fire within the plane in the area. Fortunately, the pilots were able to bring this flight to a halt in Washington, where it's actually being scheduled. So it completed its flight. A lot of mail was burned in the baggage area. The FBI finally caught Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, whose mail bombs maimed and killed people, often in high-ranking companies and universities. Perhaps less than a dozen of these covers are actually known to exist. And here you can see the official post office letter talking about this particular incident. And it's pretty well documented. Again, very, very terrible situations at Herbert. Fortunately, no one died in that particular case. 1983 was a different story. The USSR shot down a Korean airliner, 007 of all different numbers, 007. Apparently, it strayed off course over international waters just west of the Sakhalin Islands, but it killed all 269 passengers, including the U.S. Congressman Lawrence P. McDonald. This, what I'm showing you, is a memorial service invitation shown, and it was an international conspiracy developed between the United States and Russia at this particular time. First of all, they had a big hate for Lawrence P. McDonald because he hated Russia, and he would do all kinds of things to accuse them of. But in either case, it was political, but you might say between Lawrence Donald and the Russians. But unfortunately, they killed everybody. The problem with this is that, I can't say the problem with it was, none of the plane could be found, and none of the victims from the crash were ever located. That's what's so significant about this memorial. And this is why I'm showing this invitation, because no postal history is known to exist from this particular situation outside of this invitation that I'm showing you right now. Well, we've all heard about other disasters. The Lockerbie cover, as we see here on December 19th, 1988, was flying over Scotland at the time when a bomb went off and destroyed everybody that was on the plane. There were 259 passengers and crew. And here you can see the marking here that basically states this letter was delayed due to the air disaster of Pan Am Flight 103 at Lockerbie, Scotland on 21 December 1988. This is one of the rarest of all the airmail covers that were destroyed, particularly in the disaster with the bomb. The bomber was a Libyan individual by the name of Abdul Basit. He was convicted of and found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, but he only spent 12 years because somehow they got him out because they said he was very sick. So you know the politics must have played something crazy over there for him to even get out of jail at this particular period of time. Unfortunately, there was also out of the several hundred people that were on the plane, one of them or two of them was one of them in particular was a postal history dealer, Applebaum, who worked had a company in Philadelphia, an auction also an auction house in Philadelphia, and he unfortunately perished in this disaster. Again, very interesting situations and very sad situations that cause much damage and destruction. This is another cover from the Lockerbie. This was not in the normal mail. This was carried by a courier, interestingly enough, in his briefcase. He was taking this letter from, well, basically, the letter was sent by a courier to his corporate office in Canada, but unfortunately, there was no direct mail service existed between Ethiopia and South Africa. So it joined Flight 103. And this was found during the investigation in a attaché case. It was not really a diplomatic pouch, but it was a courier's pouch. And again, this is the only known situation, only known cover that was carried outside of the original mail system on that plane, this particular cover. Well, if you don't like the police, I guess you can always put a bomb on the plane, and that's what the cartel did in Bogota, Colombia. This was a flight, an Avianca flight from Bogota, which was destroyed 5 minutes after takeoff, and a bomb was put on board by the drug cartel to kill a high official of the Colombian police. Spanish auxiliary markings are seen in the red. And the mail was found near the airplane at this particular time. There are a few of these covers now. Well, I want to thank you for your time, your interest, and also to the British Empire Study Group. I apologize for somehow I screwed up the computerization here, which is typical of my ability with using the computer. But in either case, I hope we showed you some interesting things and be happy to answer any questions that we possibly can. Joan, I kind of leave it to you now.
Well, no apologies needed, Steve. I mean, the most important thing about these presentations is to share knowledge. And if you're not terrific with computers, that's okay. I hope everyone in the audience is understanding, and I'm sure they are. And don't let technology stop you from presenting, Steve. I'm glad, even though you had Landon here as your backup, your wingman, it was really great. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob Luton to go through some questions and answers. Anyone who would like priority coming over, please raise your hand and I will bring you over first. Thanks.
Thanks, Joan. Steve, thanks again for a really wonderful presentation. I was looking forward to this since the last one, 10 months ago. I want to make an announcement here to anyone in our audience who has an interest in mail robberies, as Steve was referring to in some of his slides. He's going to have a book coming out near the end of this year, perhaps maybe the beginning of next year, called Mail Robberies, Postal History, and from around the world. It's going to be a large book, probably several hundred pages. I think that's really exciting and something to look forward to. That's quite a topic. Okay, we have a question here from Richard Rizzo. Steve, he'd like to know the name of the museum that nuclear cover was in Japan.
I'll have to get it for him. I forgot the name of it. It was seen at the Essen Stamp Show there. And at the time, it was up for sale, interestingly enough, for a $50 million price tag on that particular cover. But it is in a private museum in Germany. I think Joan might have the name. I don't remember if I gave you the name in the past, Joan, but I will find it again.
I'd have to dig it up the notes.
I just can't remember it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Joan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, it's Ken Sanford. I just wanted to mention, we do have a society that collects this kind of material that Steve has shown, called the Wreck and Crash Mail Society. We have about 80 members worldwide, and we publish a quarterly journal. I'm the editor. It covers air crash, train wrecks, ship wrecks, and all the types of things that Steve collects. And if anybody's interested, just email me at KAERO, P as in Peter, HIL @gmail.com.
Well, Ken, I will try to include that in the link that goes out.
Good.
Because it is a really interesting topic. As people know, I'm partial to this. I collect morning covers, and I can't have, a lot of the morning covers come from the topic that Steve has. So it's a little morbid, but.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting though.
Okay, Steve, we have another question here from Glenn Minshall. Have you seen the mail from the 1953 Tanguy rail disaster in New Zealand?
No, I have not. I have not. If he has a cover, I'd certainly love to see a scan of it, but I have not seen it.
Okay.
Actually, there is a book that was published a few years ago on railway disaster mail worldwide, and I'm sure that's listed. If anybody's interested, I can look it up and send them a scan of the page or the listing.
Ken, do you want to tell him who wrote the book?
Yeah, it was Robin Gwynn, who lives in New Zealand,
And
Norman Hogarth, who lived in England, who's dead now.
It's an excellent book, by the way.
Yeah.
It has a lot of the things that I've shown as well, and other things that I have not shown. So it's a terrific book and a great reference on disasters.
And there was also another book written by the same two gentlemen on shipwreck mail worldwide. That's still available from the Rossiter Trust in England.
Mhm.
Great.
They're excellent books on interruptions of mail, particularly with what we just saw tonight.
All right, Steve, we got a great question here from Catherine Natal. On how you identify, the material in your field. Are all the covers that you acquire identified as to a disaster, or do you discover some of them by their date?
Most of them are not so much by date, because sometimes by date, you wouldn't know it unless you knew really that a disaster took place at that period of time, and that you might have been looking for that specific disaster. Most of these covers, believe it or not, are recovered, and the Postal Service has generally put a specific auxiliary marking on most of them. Very few are found without markings on them. But like one of the covers that I showed you earlier, that it did not have an auxiliary marking, but they're rare. Most of them have auxiliary markings. I hope that answers the question.
I think it's a good answer, Steve. I have a question. Where do you look for your material? I'm on eBay all the time, and I have to say I've never seen a disaster cover.
Well, they do occur infrequently, I should say. But you can find them on eBay. I get a bunch of auction catalogs from around the world, actually.
Mhm.
I've been attending the one in London twice a year for the last several years. So there's been a lot of foreign dealers there. A lot of the covers are worldwide that I've shown, and they're very difficult to find in the United States. So it's either auction houses or foreign dealers. And the only way you can find those basically is in foreign countries. So you're able to pick them up, and they're pretty scarce no matter where you go. Interrupted covers by disasters of any form, most of the covers have been destroyed, and sometimes they're waterlogged or burnt. And in robbery covers, very rare robbery covers. Most of them have been burned, buried, thrown in the ocean, so evidence cannot be obtained. But I would like to say one more thing about robbery covers. If you collect postal history of any form, any shape, any subject, in my opinion, it's incomplete unless you have one mail robbery cover in that exhibit of yours or in that collection of yours, because that's how interesting the robbery covers are, because it's remarkable postal history that unfortunately are very scarce covers in general.
Oh, excellent, excellent, Steve. Louis Morel has a question.
Thank you. Steve, I'd like to extend what was just asked about where you find the covers or the postal material.
Mhm.
Can you give us an example, or perhaps several examples, of the provenance of some of the covers you showed tonight? You don't own all of them, but I'm interested in knowing how they get into the hands of the public. For example, what if a police department, a military rescue mission, some kind of independent agency has the covers recovered from a disaster, a shipwreck, or what have you? How does it get from that to a collector? What are
Well,
the
that's a very good question. And it's very interesting that when material is recovered from disasters, meaning mail, the postal services around the world do their best to find out where it was supposed to go. And if there's an appropriate address on the front of that envelope, it's usually forwarded to that individual. It could be 5 years later, 10 years later, but it's forwarded to them. Unfortunately, some reach the people that it was intended to. Some of the people may have passed away or have moved. and there was no further direction. So some of it winds up in the postal facilities, and they might even, like the U.S. Post Office sometimes has a major auction of envelopes and covers that are hanging around. They just want to get rid of them, so they have an auction. So sometimes that might occur, but most of it, I would say probably more than half of it winds up to the person that it was actually addressed to. And that person who receives it may know a stamp collector, may know a dealer. And that's how it basically gets into the into the mail stream, you might say, for postal sales and things of that nature. That's about the best way I can explain it.
Yeah, can I just add to that for a second? It's Ken Sanford again.
Sure.
For example, from 9/11, there were two covers found on the street,
Right.
which came from one of the two, or either of the two airplanes that hit the tower. And probably, I assume that the person who found one turned it over to the post office, and then it was sent on to the addressee, which was in California. I don't know if they sent it directly to that person or gave it to the post office first. And like Steve says, most of the items have auxiliary markings from post offices, like labels or cachets. And if somebody receives something like that, they usually save it because it's a little unusual. And then eventually they give it to a stamp collector or sell it to a dealer or that sort of thing. So that's how they end up in collectors' hands.
The cover that you're talking about, Ken, from 9/11, I think that was addressed to Germany.
No, it was two of them were addressed to California.
California.
Those flights were coming from Boston, and both of those were covers from Maine, which connected in Boston, and they were addressed to California. As far as I know, there was no mail from 9/11 going to Europe.
No, I'm saying it was mail coming in from.
Oh, it could have been, yeah. But the two that I know of came from Maine.
Right. There could be a lot of phonies from that particular disaster. Like Ken said, there's only maybe two known. And it could still be in government hands, one of them. But these are rare items, just like all the other airmail disasters that I currently showed. They're extremely rare pieces of mail, and they really, what can I more than I say, they're very rare covers, and you have to be interested in postal history, particularly of airmails, as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of things like that in this area of disasters. They're scarce covers in general.
Thank you
Not
both
all
for
of
your
them
answers.
rare, but they're scarce.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Aja, you have your hand up. Oh, you're still muted, Aja.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
You there?
You're good.
Hi. Yep. Sorry about that. Yeah. I'm not so good at IT as well. So thank you very much for the lecture. And also hello to Ken Sanford as well. One question, there was one slide you might have skipped. I'm not sure, but I thought I saw something about snowstorm in Cairo.
I'm not sure about that one, but there was a cover from Cairo. I don't think it was a snowstorm. It was a flood. I think the snowstorm was either before that cover or after that cover.
It was something that it went past very quickly. I mean, I'm a collector of Egypt, so that's
Okay.
why
Okay.
saw Cairo then. So that's why I was just.
Yeah, I believe it was a flood cover, and I believe it was a train that crashed with that situation.
Yeah, well, flash floods in the desert are very rare, but they can be nice when they happen. Yeah. Okay.
Steve, maybe you could get that slide afterwards, and Aja, you guys could dialogue after the program and get a little more detail about it. Would that work,
We
Steve?
could even send them a copy of it, send them the
Okay.
copy of the cover that I have. That would be even better, I think, Joan. You'd have it.
Okay, would that work for you, Aja?
Yeah, that works for me. I mean, it's Aya, actually,
Oh,
but
yeah, I'm sorry. I am awful with that.
no problems. Latvian names are not terribly universal, so no hard feelings.
Thank you.
We'll see that you get that cover.
Yeah, well, it'd be very interesting. So whichever way, no problem at all.
Mhm.
And
Thank
then you'll find out it's a very rare stamp on that cover, right?
Yeah, I'll be looking out for it. Yeah,
Mm.
thank you very much indeed.
Steve, how soon after the Lockerbie incident did we start seeing any postal history?
It was a good 6 months
Hmm.
after that. It took a long time to find the material and find the debris. It was scattered over hundreds of miles.
Mm-hmm.
It was raining at the time when the Lockerbie blew up, and consequently, everything was, not only blown apart but scattered in the air for a couple hundred miles. The briefcase that I was talking about, was recovered probably 100 miles or so from the accident.
It
And
was the same thing with the mail bags.
yeah, but
Because it was in the jet stream carried the mail bags about 60 miles to the east.
right.
And they landed on the ground and more or less undamaged and not split open.
But the mail was wet. There was a lot of rain also that damaged much of the covers, and some of them had some burn marks on it too.
Mm.
They're just very scarce covers, as
Yeah.
Ken mentioned. I mean, there's only maybe a dozen known from the Lockerbie, and one was in the carrier case, the courier's case. And that's the only one known like that. And they're fairly valuable covers.
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
Oh, thank you for that. Doug Maddox, got your hand up.
I do, thank you. Steve, great presentation. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it. Glad you came to listen.
We have hard rain here in Atlanta, but nothing more than that right now. So
Yeah. The hurricane is not hitting you too hard, I hope.
we'll find out by tomorrow morning. So my question is, you didn't talk about the Malaysian air that was shot down over Ukraine a few years ago. This was by Russian separatists. It was a major disaster for the medical community because there were 150 prominent aid researchers on that plane on their way to a major conference. So it set back AIDS research by a decade. Any mail from that?
Can I answer that?
Sure.
There would not have been any mail on it because the Dutch post office would not have put mail on a Malaysian flight. They only would put mail on KLM, their own flag airline.
I didn't know that, but I knew that there was no mail on that plane.
No,
So
there wouldn't have been any Dutch mail on it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Politics play games everywhere, don't they? I hope that answers your question, Doug.
It definitively.
All right.
I mean, there's a lot of crashes out there that occur around the world that do not carry mail. And like I said, when mail on an airplane blows up, most of the mail is probably burnt or destroyed. And if the plane is flying over an ocean, and when that happens, like I showed you with the Russian shooting down that one plane over the ocean there, there wasn't even a body part found um, from that destructive action that took place. That was That was actually a real Russian terrorist attack on an innocent civilian plane.
And again, that wouldn't have been carrying any US mail because the US Post Office wouldn't put mail on a Korean flight. They would only put mail on an American flag flight.
Yeah. But even if there was mail on that flight, chances are nothing would have been found because body parts weren't found. Even the plane parts weren't found. That's what was so significant about that disaster. That's why when I got that invitation, I was shocked to see the invitation. When I saw it, I couldn't believe it. And so they celebrated the life of the congressman that was killed. But that's pretty sad what happened. Any terrorist attack is very sad. But that's the devil's mail. And death and destruction is a terrible thing. And it's a big obstacle for the postal services around the world. And that's a big problem. How do you solve it?
Mhm.
It would be interesting to know how the post offices operate in an emergency like this, like 9/11, for example. You know,
Well,
there's a lot of shuffling that has to go on.
9/11 was a real disaster. Many people were injured on the ground. Many firefighters died trying to save lives in 9/11. Police died trying to save lives. Over 3,000 people were killed in 9/11. And very little mail, even if, how much mail was carried by the planes, I don't know. But like Ken said, only 2 pieces of mail were recovered. And one of them, I think, is still very questionable. But who knows? It's just a sad disaster. And again, many of these planes that were shot down even during the wartime. You just don't have anything. Interesting, however, some interesting mail that is recovered when airlines crash in the air. When you have a crash, one airline crashing into another airplane. There was just one recently on 2 small planes that just took place here in the States. They were more or less like boutique airplanes that crashed, and they were planes from the 1930s that apparently crashed in the air, where one pilot was killed and the other pilot fortunately was able to land the plane. But it's, when you have other air disasters, there's probably 200 to 300 airmail disasters in the air where one plane hits another plane. There are covers from that particular situation, and I do have some, and I know Ken has some. And but probably most of them didn't carry mail. Not all of them carry mail. So when you find a cover like that from an air crash of one plane with another, they're really prized covers to find. I didn't show any, but I do have a few.
Mhm. All right,
Anybody
Chris-
else have anything they'd like to
Chris
add?
Savage. You're muted, Chris. There you go.
Is that any better?
Yes.
Well, greetings from Costa Rica. It's rainy down here too. I don't know if it's a hurricane effect, but we've had huge amounts of rain. No, my question was this. In 9/11, horrendous though it was, there must have been huge amounts of correspondence about to be mailed or sort of in transit in the building. I mean, it was 2 huge towers with many, many offices with a huge amount of correspondence, I suppose, en route somewhere. Would that qualify for this type of collection, or is this something different because it wasn't on an airplane or sunk on a ship or whatever? How
Well,
does that work?
They all have their merits, some more than others.
Right.
For example, there was a Japanese airliner that was stuck in Canada. because it was held up by the aviation areas. And it was even in Lynn's magazine, not Lynn's, but it was in, I think maybe it was Lynn's magazine. I tried to get a hold of that and I couldn't find it, but there was a write-up in Lynn's about a Japanese airliner that was detained and couldn't fly into the United States and landed in Canada. And there was a big article of it in Lynn's, if I recall, when that happened. So that would have been a nice cover to find.
Right.
But I haven't been able to find it.
Hmm.
But I know it exists.
If there
Well,
were, if
yeah.
there were any covers ready to be mailed from the Twin Towers, it could be a collectible item, but of course, it wasn't official mail yet.
Right. Right.
But chances are it was all burned up anyway.
Hmm.
I would assume 99% of it was burned up. If 1% escaped, we probably would have heard about it, but I haven't seen anything. And I don't know if Ken has seen anything either, but it's possible. Then you can think about the mail that might have been sitting in the mailboxes in that
Exactly.
area.
Right. And I only know about the 2 covers from Maine that were found on the street.
Yeah, that was from the disaster.
Right.
But there could have been mail in the mailboxes, and I haven't even seen that, where it was delayed or whatever due to the disaster. And I'm surprised I haven't seen that, but I don't know what's happened to that mail. Good
Right.
question. Very good.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Do we have any other questions out there? Frank Bloom.
Most things that I have seen are usually delivered in body bags, and they really don't have any other statement saying that just says they were damaged in transit. So may or may not have anything that would have any notation on it or auxiliary markings, because the Postal Service basically has almost stopped doing that in the last 10, 20 years. They just keep sticking it in those plastic body bags and send it on. So they don't really do anything.
Most of the ones that I've seen in those clear plastic body bags do have a letter from the post office explaining why it's damaged. Most of them that I've seen.
If they're done that way, but I've gotten a lot of the mail because I get some of that stuff too. And it's just basically the notice on the outside of the bag that says, it was damaged in transit.
Mhm.
Do
Usually-
a little bit of bring it back for a body bag. So when you use the term body bag, not everyone, visions come up that are not, so could just
It's a
for
plastic,
those of us who are not that familiar with it.
it's a plastic covering, a little larger than a number 10 size envelope usually. And it's got a statement on it from the postmaster. It says, dear postal customer, this item has been damaged in postal handling, and signed. They're all pre-printed. I have about 20 or 30 different kinds actually
Mhm.
that are, because they're printed locally. They're not something that Washington DC comes up with. They just printed locally.
Yeah, they rarely mention why it was delayed.
Yep.
A lot of it was due to accidents on the transportation from trucks, things of that nature, where they have huge amounts. And like you said, they put them in the plastic bags and they send them out. Some of them might have been burned, some of them have been damaged, but usually you don't have the auxiliary markings at all on those
Nothing.
particular covers. Yeah. They're no fun to collect.
Yeah. Like I said, I have about, I got a couple hundred of them so far, but you really can't tell what they go with.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is if you have that many in different body bags, that's a collection in itself. As long
Yeah,
as
I
it's,
keep 'em,
as
so.
long as it's not a human in that body bag.
No, just mail.
Okay.
Doug Nethercleft.
This may have been said already. I got a bit lost in the transfer, had to come back in. but that was the most riveting and varied presentation I've ever seen. That was wonderful. And I mean,
Thank
it's
you.
12:30 here at night in the UK. And now and again, I sort of nod off towards the end. But today I did not. It was very, very good.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Very nice.
Jerry
But
Petrowski.
I'm glad you stayed up for it. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Oh, it was worth it.
Thank you.
And that term body bag is quite commonly used, but the more acceptable terminology is ambulance cover.
That's true. It's
Yeah.
a plastic ambulance cover.
Well, yeah, I have some which are actually envelopes. I have one from, I think it's from the 1953, 1954 air crash of Prestwick, Scotland,
Oh,
where the partly burned airgram was inside I guess, an official post office envelope, and actually also had a cachet on it. Actually, it was a different cachet that was on the on the damaged cover.
Yeah, that was in December 1954.
Yeah.
There's a lot of mail from that. They come on eBay every week. There are thousands and thousands of them. And they use the regular post office paper envelope. The clear plastic body bags didn't really start to be used until after the year 2000, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
much later. Yeah.
Yeah, the one I have was actually given to me by a friend of mine up in Canada. It was some mail that was sent from the UK to him, and I worked with this fellow, and he knew that I collected postal history, so he gave it to me. But what was interesting on this particular one, by the time it got to where he was in Nova Scotia, he'd returned back to England, so it was redirected back there. So it's interesting markings on it. Anyway, enough from me about body bags and ambulance covers.
Raphael, you have your hand up. If you have a question, you could unmute and ask.
Yes. Are there envelopes from Amtrak are collectible in the sense it was not really per se a disaster, but it was really, bad times during that. Because I know the post office during that time were, like you call the body bags, delivering mail that had a plastic wrapper say this was irradiated for Amtrak.
Well, they're all interrupted mail. It's all interrupted mail. It's just a matter of the degree of the interruption. So, a lot of the trains, some of the planes may have some delivery issues, get a late start. For some reason, the weather interrupts the communications between a plane taking off at an appropriate time or a train stopping because of flooding. Sometimes you don't get any auxiliary markings unless there's really major damage that takes place either on a plane or a train.
Yeah, I had got some from that overseas that had got wet and things like that.
Yeah.
And at that time, I was able to get one from that says radiated for Amtrak, right?
Mhm.
But never give it a second thought and throw it out at the time. Now I wish I would have kept it.
It's interrupted mail, and that's basically what I collect. And even the Wreck and Crash Mail Society, that's basically all interrupted mail of different varieties from, like I said, from war, from shipwrecks, to train wrecks, to planes, and then everything else in between. War and weather are two of the major areas from around the world.
Right, right.
And in the United States, you see United States material, but in order to really find other stuff, it's either on an auction or it's going to some of these countries where they have a big stamp show. And that's one reason why I like to go to London before the Brexit situation happened, because you used to have 100 and some dealers at Stampex. Now you only have about 60 or 70. So I kind of put a little damper on the number of dealers that were there. But that was a great show to find material from anywhere. And I also have a little collection of Braille mail. I think I may have shown one of the covers in my first presentation. I can't remember offhand. But it was a letter written in Braille that was stopped by the censors during the Spanish War in 1936. So it's a very rare cover. And as a matter of fact, I'm writing a paper on it right now for the Wreck and Crash Mail Society to be published in the APS journal on that particular cover, plus a few others. Ken, you'll be happy to know that the rough draft of that article is done.
Well, thank you. It's very interesting
Yeah.
lecture. Thanks.
Gary
Thank you.
Lowe.
Good evening, Steve. That was just a fantastic, definitive presentation on this subject matter. So congratulations. Since I'm a philatelic taxonomist, just a point of clarification. The point was made earlier that the term we're bandying about, body bag, is really refers to ambulance covers, and that's indeed correct. But there is something called a body bag, and those are envelopes that were used by dead letter offices, quite appropriately, I guess, to forward mail either to the sender or, if they were finally located, the recipient. So yeah, there are really things called body bags, but they were used by dead letter offices.
Thank you, Gary.
All right.
Hey, Steve, you mentioned the US Post Office has auctions of their dead letter stuff.
Yes, periodically that happens. Yes.
And is that in the Federal Register? You know, I've never seen one. That's why.
No, I haven't seen one. I haven't seen one in years, Joan. So they may have stopped, but I know that they did this at least 15 or 20 years ago, because I got involved trying to find some of the material and bidding on them. Not that I got anything, but they did have it. And I think if you write a letter, ask the Postal Service, send a letter to the main office of the US Postal Service, I'm sure they will be able to give you some history on that.
Yeah, because I was surprised. Like the reason I asked is I had my mom do a little test to write an unposted letter without postage and to see if it would get to me and with postage due. And it never arrived. So it's somewhere.
I guess they threw that letter out instead of putting markings on it to no postage applied.
Yeah. So I took that off the lesson plan for the kids, you know, because I was like, that's sort of not too good.
But I think that's a good point that you brought out. I think it would be nice to send a letter to the Postal Service to see if they'll give us an answer, because yeah, they did have auctions years ago. I remember them. And but I haven't seen anything in the last several years.
But wouldn't it be unfair if the stamp falls out of the envelope? Then your mail gets trashed.
Well, that's not fair, but it happens. Unfortunately, wet weather can take the stamp off. Sometimes you don't glue the stamp on appropriately and it comes off from rough handling of mail. But those are little things that happen. And with all the millions and millions of pieces of mail that go through the world, it's a small percentage, but it does occur. And
let's not talk about how lazy FedEx is about. Oh God, they will destroy a lot if the label comes off.
Yeah.
If you're shipping an auction lot, they just destroy it. They put it through a shredder.
Can I comment on covers that don't have stamps? I collect two airlines, Pan Am and Imperial Airways crash covers. And during the 30s and up to the mid 40s, most of the crashes, or a lot of them, were flying boats. And of course, they crashed in water and the stamps get soaked off. Under the Universal Postal Union rules, a post office is not supposed to charge postage due on such a cover, but sometimes they do. So we do have a few crash covers with postage due markings or postage due stamps from such covers.
Thanks, Ken.
That's insult to injury.
Mhm.
Mark Sherry, I see you had your hand up.
So did Clark over there. So I don't know if he's still.
Doug Coombs. Yeah. Doug, you had your hand up? No. Well, I want to give a shout out to Hugh Mosher and Clive Levinson from our forum. Good to see you here tonight, guys. Clifford Tobias, do you have a question?
Yes, interrupted mail. Would you add to that mail to the U.S. government and that's been singed, burned in Washington that I believe is still in effect? I have one of those. I can call
Well,
that interrupted mail.
Yes, I mean, usually if you get mail that's been burned, something had to happen to it naturally. And usually they would put something on it, could have been damaged. They may not say why it was damaged, but they might just say on the envelope, there's an auxiliary marking that unfortunately it was damaged in the course of travel or just course of mail. Again, that might be also in a ambulance envelope as well, depending on how much damage there might have been.
But I don't recall exactly how I got it, but it was something that obviously I sent it and was returned to me properly. And I couldn't figure it out for a while till I remembered that all mail, at least at that time, was subject to being in effect burned, to singed, not entirely burned, but that was a part of the security procedure. This was in connection with the bicentennial of the White House, mail going back and forth in regard to the photograph that was taken with the Bushes when I was in Washington. And I guess from what listening to you, I guess that would count as a form of interrupted mail, although it was official. It was done that way. It wasn't anything accidental. I think the mail was subject to being checked through security
Expected. But usually you would see markings on the cover that
Right.
run through an X-ray or something of that nature as well.
I'll have to dig that out. Okay.
Yeah, because you see that a lot when it's going to government agencies, particularly the presidents of the country. They've all been scanned for bombs and other potentials. And then, if you remember, we had the poison powder
Right.
in the early 21st century, and they were being delivered in so-called body bags then, the plastic body bags then with the markings. So, and there was thousands, if not probably a couple million of those covers. They were very common at the time.
I was thinking of the Iranian airliner that was shot down by a U.S. Navy cruiser. Remember that? I don't know where exactly was that over water. I guess
That was over water, and that was a big mistake by the U.S. by the U.S. Army or military.
Yeah, but the Navy screwed that up entirely because the plane was on a predetermined official normal route, and the crew, and the equipment on it could not identify, distinguish between an airliner and a jet fighter. And the crew evidently assumed that it was a F-14, Iranian F-14. It was, of course, one of our old planes, sold to Iran, not knowing that the Iranian F-14s did not have bomb racks. So the plane could not have been ready to attack the ship. It had no bombs. Our F-14s had bomb racks, and they shot it down anyway, thinking it was not knowing it was an airliner.
Yeah, that was a big error, and the United States admitted it at the time.
Right, yeah. The
Sad things happen, just like when two different airlines crash in the air at the same time. You know, nothing is 100%, unfortunately, and these accidents occur. They're terrible, and many of them have no identification after the fact. In other words, this particular accident you're talking about had no mail. It was just history that took place. And so there's really nothing to collect from it. It's just sad when it happens. Even if you do collect from it, it's still sad to know that that happened, even though you have the postal history to show it.
How about the which could have philatelic connection? I'm thinking of the plane that carried Dag Hammarskjöld in Africa, which of course led to the American stamp being issued for him and the error on the stamp. But that obviously was over land, so it may not have carried mail though.
I believe that was a charter flight, so it wouldn't have been carrying mail.
Okay, yeah. By the way, I have not a philatelic artifact, but an artifact of the early Cold War. I have a K-bar knife, which was probably used. The man who gave it to me was a Marine aerial gunner at Operation Crossroads. That's the atomic bomb at Bikini, 2 bombs. And it's definitely an early Cold War artifact. I can't prove it was there, but he gave it to me, and he was there on the carrier that was the photographic lab in the lagoon of Bikini Island. So that's quite an artifact, I think.
Yeah. Well, anytime you get something like that from someone who was there, you have to assume it was an artifact.
And that's just part of the longer story, but the excellent program. Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I'm glad everybody, and I want to thank everybody also for attending, particularly those of you outside of the United States where it's already 1 o'clock in the morning. I want to thank you for being with us tonight. And I want to thank again Joan and everybody associated with putting the program together. I'm just sorry I screwed up the computers here, Joan.
Oh, will you stop that? Let's not even, it's no big deal.
No.
You want to talk about horror stories, we could do a whole other seminar, webinar horror stories. But this is really fantastic. Looking forward to that book. So if anyone is interested in the book, you can send me an email, or send Ken an email, or send Steve an email, and that way you'll get firsthand knowledge of what's happening with it.
And I'd like to ask anybody that's still on with me tonight, if you have any mail robbery postal history in your possession, I would greatly appreciate a scan of it or a copy of it. So I might be able to even put it in the book before it's finally printed.
Yeah, just to clarify, it's going to be a book on mail robberies.
Postal history around the world.
Do you have the Pony Express ones that we sold?
No, I don't have the one with the Indians on it. That's in the library of that's in the National Postal Museum.
Really? We sold that.
You may have sold it. You mean the two robberies from Indians?
Yeah, they were in the Dale Lichtenstein collection.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying one of the covers on exhibit at the National Postal
Oh, okay.
Museum, and the other one is still in the other person's private possession.
Okay.
I haven't seen that outside of the original printing of it, but those are both in the book.
Okay, that's a fascinating, again, a fascinating story.
Yeah.
Fascinating that it was recovered.
True. They were both recovered in the same bag. It wasn't a body bag at the time. What was that called? The satchel, the leather satchel. Joan, can you remember?
No, I don't remember what that
I'm
was.
trying to think of what it was called. Just can't think of it. But it was called, they were both in the same bag when they were recovered. The Indian mail was recovered.
I think it was called a mail pouch.
No, it wasn't a mail pouch, Ken. It was actually a leather bag, and there's a specific name for it, which I cannot think of it offhand. But I'll remember it. My mind is getting a little loose these years.
Yeah, that was a fabulous thing. That was
Great
fabulous.
covers. Yeah, great covers. There's a lot of great mail robbery covers, Joan, and you're going to get to see them in that book.
Yeah. No, I can't wait.
I know Ken's been helping me with it, and I really appreciate his help too. But there's going to be over 400 covers that under one roof that you've never seen before. And besides postal cards, talking about mail robberies and so forth and so on. I'm excited about it. I mean, I've been working on it for 20 years, so I've been putting a lot of stuff together. So it's going to come to fruition now, hopefully before or just after the first of the year.
Yeah,
It's all written. It's just a matter of editing right now and then publishing it.
All right.
Thank you, Landon. Thank you to your family. It's great to see, family support on these things, because it's more about the story and the history than, did you guys have to be postal historians or post stamp people to get what was going on? I thought it was.
I had to twist his arm.
Oh.
But it was easy to twist, and he was terrific. And he's been helping me put my stuff together, because when it comes to computers, I'm a total jerk. And I mean, I know how to turn it on and off, but as far as putting stuff together on it, I'm not too capable. And Landon is a good computer guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's been my pleasure to be able to work with my grandpa since I was in 7th grade. I'm a senior in college now, so it's been around 9 years already. Especially, I mean, the most important part is obviously spending time with my grandpa, but on top of it,
oh yeah,
the depth and the scope of his collection is truly something I've never seen before. So getting to work on it with him, compiling all these presentations, helping him put the book together has really been an amazing opportunity for me.
Oh,
thank you.
You must have some amazing reports in school.
My wife is also watching this. She's not a philatelist, but she's a historian. So she's interested in the history of all this.
I think that's great.
Okay.
That is great.
And your upcoming topic about the Titanic exhibit, that should be great.
That's
in
going to
Ballpex.
That's going to be at Ballpex. It's an interesting exhibit. It's never been shown before. It has all 4 major disasters under one roof and under one frame. And that's the Titanic, the Lockerbie's, the Unabomber, and the Graf Zeppelin. And it's going to be called the Devil's Mail. And it's a one frame exhibit. It's a non-competitive exhibit. And it was put together with the interest of bringing the public into a stamp show, and hopefully maybe encouraging people to collect stamps in postal history. So it's going to be shown for the first time ever. I tried to put it together for the APS show, but it was too late by the time I got the idea and put it together. So it was too late for them to market it. So it's going to be at Ballpex to start off, and I'm planning to use it maybe at some of the other big shows around the country.
Well, that would be great. You have dog food breath. Sorry, that I was talking to my dog. But anyway, I mean, it was one of those things that I just got a woof of. Anyway, yeah, I keep getting mail. There may be more disaster mail in Sarasota and Bradenton as I watch the water level come up to my house. So
scary, the floods.
The dock is under. So
as long as it doesn't wash it away.
Yeah.
So I can't see outside anymore, but we have had a lot of rain, a lot of wind. I'm in Inglewood,
are you
Florida,
in Florida?
just south of Tampa, just south of Sarasota.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, my house is in Bradenton and I keep getting these alarms and I'm watching the water. It's all the way over the seawall. And
Wow.
it's, it's the docks totally under. So it's going to be, I'm sitting there saying, okay, that's a few $1,000s to repair all that.
I'm inland, so it doesn't, not quite so bad. Not on the water.
Yeah, we
Well,
normally don't get it because we have the Anna Marie Island, but
keep your
oh,
stamp
well.
collection safe.
Yeah, more disaster mail, right? You'll see
Right.
harmful
Yeah.
disaster mail.
Well, there was a cover that I've shown before. It was in London during the bombing of London in World War II, where the bombs actually blew up a bank, and the safety deposit boxes in the bank held a very large stamp collection. And you can see covers from that where it was marked damage during the bombing of London. There's interesting covers, but they do exist from that particular standpoint. I have one or two of those covers in my collection.
Wow.
So, but there's things around you just don't know, and that's what's so exciting for me, to find something that we didn't even know existed. Particularly when I saw that Japanese cover that was found from Hiroshima in World War II. So these are the things that pop up. And if you're not in another country or traveling around, when you're just in the United States, you don't have the access really to a lot of these different situations that occur around the world, unless it's through a stamp auction. So I try to look at both when I can. So that's the excitement. And I want to thank you again. It's been fun talking about it. I love what I collect. And I want to thank Ken Sanford for covering me on some issues. And this time, Ken, you noticed I said courier and not diplomatic pouch. But in either case, I want to thank everybody for their comments, and certainly I'd be happy to answer any questions by mail, email, or anything like that I possibly can answer.
Well, thank you again.
Very good. Thanks very much for a great presentation.
Thank you all. Thank you. I
Thank
appreciate
you, Steve.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Steve.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks.
Good
Thanks
night.
for staying up.
Good
Thanks,
night, everyone.
Good night.
If they come to No Jacks, they'll get lollipops that play tunes.
See you tomorrow, John.
Okay, see you. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you,
Steve?
Rob. That was great.
Steve,
Yes.
I wanted to mention earlier, I had a little bit of a connection to the Lockerbie.
Yeah.
I worked for Volkswagen. I retired from Volkswagen, and we were having our Christmas party the day that the plane event happened.
Mhm.
And they announced it at our Christmas party, and I'll tell you what, it went from a party to a funeral.
Wow.
It was incredible. Three of our executives died in that plane.
That was a horrible disaster.
Oh
and,
God, yeah.
And it was a horrible after situation when the guy was convicted. Okay. He was a terrorist, no questions about it. And the politics somehow got him out of jail. They claimed that he was very sick, going to die, and that was a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
And he eventually did die, but not the way that it was expressed, if you know what I mean. That got him out of jail. As far as the Unabomber is concerned, he just recently died a couple months back.
Yes.
And I even have an original letter from him from jail that was sent to someone else that I purchased. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, it's rare stuff, and it's very interesting to put a collection like that together. And there's several books out there that are helpful, very helpful. I didn't list the references that I listed in the first presentation, but they're the same references basically. And You can get that reference from Joan.
I'm looking forward to your book on the robberies.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting one to you.
Sounds good, Steve.
Thank you so much. I
Thank you
appreciate
so much too.
it. Yeah. Everybody have
You
a
have
good
a
evening.
question?
Yes.
Oh, no, you just chime in. You don't have to raise your hand at this point. We're all buddies.
No, I would just like to invite everybody to fill out 2026 in Riga, which I can just announce insofar that the association has it's now a legal entity in Riga. So 26 to 29 of July is saying about getting out of the United States. Elsewhere in Europe, everybody is welcome.
It's July of next year,
2026.
2026. Well, if you if you send me a note, I'll put it on a calendar so that way people can see it.
I'll be more than happy to do so, and I hope it's going to be fun. I've been working hard on the corporate identity, getting the associations set up, and sort of talking to museums and the National Library for venues. But it's exciting too. I mean, I used to do events in Kuwait when I was working with the National Museum in Kuwait, and I've missed it, and so now I'm feeling alive again. So it's great.
Very good.
And
it's a lot of work.
It is, but we also want to, I want to have a lecture series. So certainly, if you feel inclined, you would be more than welcome to deliver a lecture there as well.
Good possibility.
The door is open.
Well, thank you very much. We'll extend that. We'll extend it when there's more people on too, so that way we could get a broader.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, certainly, I'd like a full program, and there's a lot of exciting information, and it'd be fantastic to share it with a large, hopefully very international audience.
Yes.
Yeah, that might be something. I know we just did the Collectors Club. We just did something on the Boston 2026, and I think it's good to do those periodically because a lot of the exhibitors have questions. You know, like how much is the frame? You know, what type of who's judging? Those types of things. And it was very it was more popular than I thought it would be, being that it wasn't really a philatelic topic per se. So I think those types of talks or those types of lectures are very helpful to people who are considering going to the event.
Yeah, well, I think that well, variety is the spice of life, and I'd like there to be something for everybody at all different levels, and especially for school children and so on, to get into the hobby and to explore all the aspects of geography and history and in all its different ways. So, I mean, it can be pitched at so many different levels.
And definitely send me the information, and we'll try to get something together. I'll talk to the Collectors Club also, because they're a better forum for that, because they have a more, how should I put it? If they did 2 of the Boston 2026s, they should do more of the internationals to let some of the collectors know. I think it would be, but one or the other will get you covered for that.
I'd appreciate that very much. I mean, I'm hoping to be a tiny part of Boston 2026 as well. Hoping.
They just said that they will make work any society that wants to go, regardless of the financial ability. So reach out to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm into getting something done. I mean,
Yeah,
results.
well, that sounds great.
I'm
And
going to say goodnight.
Yeah. And
Good night, Steve. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
have a lovely evening,
Yep,
and
you too.
and keep safe. Keep safe. Hopefully.
Good night, Joan.
Good night. Thank you, Rob.
Good night, everybody.